The cruelest betrayals are never made by strangers, they begin with the people who know your name. Before the first hint of sunrise touched the snow-covered peaks, Evelyn Carter sat silently in the back of a weathered wagon with her wrists loosely bound by coarse rope that no longer mattered. The cold morning wind slipped through the wooden slats, carrying the scent of pine, frost, and smoke from the village she would never see again. Across the frozen courtyard, her older brother counted heavy leather pouches filled with silver coins, weighing each one carefully before slipping them beneath his cloak. His face never lifted toward the wagon. He never searched for his sister's eyes. It was as though looking at her would make the bargain real. Evelyn lowered her gaze instead. She remembered when those same hands had once steadied her while she learned to walk across icy creek stones, when that same voice had promised no one would ever harm her as long as he lived. Promises, she realized, could disappear far more easily than people. Around them, nervous whispers drifted between villagers who pretended not to stare. They spoke of the enemy pack beyond the northern forest, of the ruthless Alpha King whose name alone silenced taverns and council halls alike. Some claimed he had never smiled. Others insisted he had been born beneath a blood-red moon destined to conquer every rival kingdom. Evelyn had stopped believing stories years ago. Stories never saved anyone. A merchant fastened the final strap across the wagon before climbing onto the driver's seat. "We leave now," he muttered without emotion. Only then did Owen finally approach. For a heartbeat, Evelyn thought regret might soften his expression. Instead, he simply placed a folded wool blanket beside her. "They'll treat you fairly if you obey," he said quietly, avoiding her eyes. Evelyn studied him with a calmness that surprised even herself. "Did father know?" she asked. The question floated into the frozen air between them. Owen's jaw tightened, but no answer came. He stepped backward as though silence were easier than truth. The horses lurched forward, their hooves crunching across the thin layer of ice covering the road. Evelyn never looked back again. Miles away, beyond mountain ridges hidden beneath silver mist, Blackwood Citadel stood above the cliffs like an ancient guardian watching over endless forests. Inside its towering stone walls, servants moved carefully through quiet corridors while dawn painted narrow windows with pale gold light. In the highest chamber, Alpha King Lucian Ashford opened his eyes with a sharp breath. Another dream. The same dream that had haunted every season of his adult life. A young woman stood beneath moonlit trees, her face illuminated by soft silver light, her eyes filled not with fear but quiet sorrow. He never heard her voice. He never reached her before she disappeared into drifting white mist. 12 years. Every night the dream returned unchanged, leaving only the impossible certainty that somewhere beyond his kingdom, she truly existed. Lucian rose from his chair beside the cold fireplace and walked toward the frost-covered window overlooking the valley below. The first rays of morning stretched across distant roads winding through the mountains. Something deep inside him stirred with unfamiliar urgency, as though the invisible thread pulling at his soul had suddenly grown tighter. He rested one hand against the icy glass, unable to explain why his heartbeat refused to settle. Far below, hidden among the winding trails leading toward Blackwood, a lone wagon slowly crossed the border into his territory, carrying the woman whose face had lived inside his dreams long before either of them knew the other's name. The journey north lasted 3 days, though to Evelyn Carter it felt suspended outside of time. Snow blanketed the hills in quiet layers that softened every fence, every pine tree, every forgotten farmhouse they passed. No one spoke to her unless necessary. The guards assigned to escort the wagon were disciplined rather than cruel, exchanging only brief words as they crossed frozen streams and narrow mountain roads. That alone unsettled her. She had expected insults from the people she had always been taught to fear. Instead, she was met with careful silence. On the morning of the 4th day, the towering walls of Blackwood Citadel emerged through the drifting fog. Massive stone towers rose above dark evergreens, their banners swaying gently against the pale winter sky. The gates slowly opened without a single shout, revealing a courtyard alive with quiet purpose instead of chaos. Soldiers trained with measured precision. Stable hands cared for horses. Servants crossed the square carrying baskets of fresh bread whose warm scent floated through the cold air. It was nothing like the savage kingdom described in whispered stories back home. The wagon rolled to a stop in the center of the courtyard. Evelyn lowered her eyes as one of the guards untied the rope around her wrists. It had never been pulled tightly enough to leave a mark. "Wait here," the captain said respectfully before walking toward the grand staircase leading into the castle. Evelyn remained still, wrapping the faded wool blanket more closely around her shoulders as curious glances followed her from every direction. Some servants whispered quietly. Others simply stared, puzzled that a prisoner from an enemy family had arrived without chains or public humiliation. High above the courtyard, behind the tall windows of the western tower, Lucian Ashford stood motionless. He had been reviewing maps with his council when an unfamiliar feeling interrupted every thought. Without understanding why, he had crossed the room and looked outside. The instant his eyes found the lone woman standing beside the weathered wagon, the world around him seemed to disappear. The voices behind him faded. The scratching of quills stopped existing. Even the winter wind beyond the glass became silent. His heartbeat echoed through the stillness. It was her. Not someone who resembled the woman from his dreams. Not a passing similarity created by hope. The same gentle face. The same quiet eyes. The same expression that had followed him through 12 years of restless nights beneath countless moons. She looked smaller than she had inside the dream, more tired, more human, but unmistakably real. Lucian took one slow step backward as memories of every sleepless dawn returned all at once. Every advisor who had dismissed the dreams as meaningless. Every healer who had called them exhaustion. Every year he had searched crowded festivals, distant villages, and foreign courts for a face no one else believed existed. Yet there she stood, not arriving as an honored guest or visiting noblewoman, but as a young woman traded across the border by people who should have protected her. "Your Majesty?" Lord Aldrin asked carefully from behind him. Lucian never answered. His silver eyes remained fixed on the courtyard below where Evelyn finally lifted her head for the first time since arriving. She did not look toward his window. She simply closed her eyes for a brief moment, drawing one slow breath as though preparing herself for whatever fate waited beyond the castle doors. Something inside Lucian tightened with quiet certainty. Whatever destiny had carried her across mountains and kingdoms had not brought her here by accident. And for the first time since the dreams had begun, he was no longer searching for a ghost. She had finally stepped into his world. The enormous doors of Blackwood Citadel opened without a sound. Evelyn Carter expected cold stone cells, locked gates, or questioning eyes waiting to measure her worth. Instead, an elderly house steward dressed in dark blue stepped forward and bowed his head with quiet respect. "Welcome to Blackwood Citadel, Miss Carter," he said gently. The greeting caught her completely off guard. She searched the faces surrounding him for mockery, but found none. The steward motioned toward the wide staircase illuminated by warm lantern light. "His Majesty has prepared rooms for your comfort. Please allow us to escort you inside." Evelyn hesitated before taking her first step across the polished marble floor. Every instinct warned her that kindness offered by strangers usually carried hidden conditions. Yet the castle itself seemed strangely peaceful. Large fireplaces filled the corridors with steady warmth. Fresh evergreen branches decorated the halls despite the middle of winter. Servants greeted one another with quiet smiles as they passed. No one whispered insults. No one treated her as though she were a prize captured from a defeated enemy. A young maid led Evelyn into a spacious chamber overlooking the snow-covered forest. Sunlight poured through tall windows framed with dark oak. A fire already burned inside the stone hearth. Folded dresses rested neatly upon the bed beside a thick wool cloak trimmed with soft white fur. A tray carried warm soup, fresh bread, honey, and steaming tea whose gentle fragrance filled the room. Evelyn slowly turned in disbelief. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. The maid smiled kindly. "There is no mistake, Miss Carter. These were chosen personally under His Majesty's orders." Before Evelyn could ask another question, the maid excused herself, leaving the room as quietly as she had entered. Meanwhile, word spread rapidly through the castle. Soldiers exchanged puzzled glances during afternoon patrols. Kitchen workers paused their conversations. Noble advisors quietly questioned one another inside the council chamber. No prisoner from an enemy family had ever received accommodations reserved for honored guests. Lord Aldrin finally approached Lucian Ashford inside the royal library where the Alpha King stood staring into the dancing flames of the fireplace with distant eyes. "Your Majesty," Aldrin began carefully, "the council requests clarification. Many are struggling to understand today's decision." Lucian remained silent for several moments before answering without looking away from the fire. "Is she safe?" Aldrin blinked in surprise. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Has she been shown respect?" "Every instruction has been followed exactly." Lucian nodded once. "Then nothing else requires explanation." Aldrin understood immediately that no further questions would receive answers. After he departed, Lucian closed his eyes as another fragment of the familiar dream surfaced without warning. Moonlight shimmered across a quiet lake. A young woman laughed softly while wooden wind chimes moved above her head. He still could not hear the words she spoke, yet every dream left the same feeling inside his heart, as though someone precious had been lost long before memory itself. Across the castle, Evelyn stood beside the tall window watching snowflakes drift slowly through the afternoon sky. She touched the smooth wooden frame, uncertain whether she was truly free or simply living inside a more beautiful prison. Why would the feared ruler of an enemy kingdom offer comfort instead of punishment? Why had every servant looked at her with quiet compassion instead of suspicion? As the sun disappeared behind the distant mountains, neither Evelyn nor Lucian realized they were asking the very same question. Neither of them understood why destiny had chosen this impossible meeting, only that the silence between them already carried the weight of a story neither soul could yet remember. The days inside Blackwood Citadel settled into an unfamiliar rhythm that Evelyn Carter could neither understand nor distrust completely. Every morning, fresh flowers appeared on the small table beside her window before she even awoke. Every afternoon, meals were delivered with quiet courtesy. Every evening, the fireplaces were carefully tended so the winter air never reached her room. No one questioned her. No one demanded gratitude. It was as though the entire castle had silently agreed to protect a mystery no one dared explain. Yet peace did not bring rest. On the fourth night, Evelyn awoke with her heart racing beneath the heavy quilt. Moonlight spilled across the wooden floor, and for one impossible moment she could have sworn she smelled fresh pine carried on a gentle summer breeze instead of winter snow. She closed her eyes again, and fragments of a dream slipped through her thoughts before fading away like mist. She saw a quiet forest glowing beneath a full moon. Wind chimes carved from smooth branches swayed softly overhead. Somewhere nearby, a young boy laughed. She could not see his face clearly, only silver eyes reflecting pale light between the trees. A small wooden bracelet rested in her hands. She reached toward the boy as though returning something precious. Before she could touch him, the forest dissolved into white light, leaving only a single feeling behind. Loss. Deep, aching loss. Evelyn sat upright, pressing one hand against her chest. None of it made sense. She had never visited such a forest. She had never known a child with silver eyes. Yet the dream felt less like imagination and more like a memory she had forgotten long ago. Across the castle, Lucian Ashford stood alone inside the ancient observatory overlooking the sleeping kingdom. The stars stretched endlessly above the mountains, bright enough to cast pale shadows across the stone floor. Sleep had abandoned him once again. Since Evelyn's arrival, the dreams had changed. For 12 years they had always ended before he reached the mysterious young woman. Now they continued further. Tonight he had seen her kneeling beside a quiet stream, carefully tying a braided cord around the wrist of a frightened little boy whose clothes were torn from wandering through the forest. He remembered the warmth in her smile. He remembered hearing the wind move through the trees. Most unsettling of all, he remembered his own voice. "Promise you will not forget me," the little boy had whispered. Lucian opened his eyes with a slow breath. The words echoed inside him with impossible clarity even though he knew they belonged to a dream. He walked toward an old cabinet hidden beneath layers of dust and unlocked it with a silver key hanging beneath his shirt. Inside rested a worn wooden bracelet, faded with age but carefully preserved. He had carried it since childhood without ever remembering where it came from. His fingers traced its smooth surface while the strange certainty inside him grew stronger. Somewhere, somehow, the bracelet belonged to the woman now sleeping beneath his roof. The following morning, Evelyn wandered into the castle gardens for the first time. Fresh snow sparkled across trimmed hedges while tiny birds hopped between evergreen branches searching for seeds. She paused beside a frozen fountain where delicate carvings of wolves circled the stone basin. Suddenly, an overwhelming feeling swept over her. She knew this place. Not the castle itself, but the quiet stillness, the shape of the trees, the sound of distant wind passing through the mountains. Her hand instinctively rested against the cold edge of the fountain as another image flashed across her mind. A young boy smiled as she fastened something around his wrist and whispered, "You will always find your way home." The vision disappeared as quickly as it had come, leaving Evelyn staring into the frozen water with tears she could not explain. Somewhere above the gardens, unseen behind the branches of an ancient cedar, Lucian watched her from a distant balcony. When she placed her hand against the stone fountain, his own fingers unconsciously tightened around the old wooden bracelet hidden inside his pocket. Neither of them understood why forgotten memories had begun awakening at the exact same moment, but destiny had quietly started unlocking doors that time had kept sealed for many years. Within a week, whispers spread through every hallway of Blackwood Citadel faster than the winter wind outside its walls. Some believed Evelyn Carter had enchanted the Alpha King with hidden magic. Others insisted she carried an ancient blessing that no one could see. The servants ignored the rumors, continuing to treat her with quiet respect, but the castle's noble families were far less willing to accept the mysterious stranger who had suddenly become the center of the king's silent attention. Evelyn noticed the change immediately. Conversations stopped whenever she entered a room. Curious smiles had disappeared, replaced by cautious glances that lingered a little too long. Even so, she refused to hide inside her chamber. Each afternoon she visited the castle gardens, finding comfort beneath the snow-covered cedar trees where the world felt peaceful enough to breathe. One gray afternoon, while soft flakes drifted through the still air, she discovered an elderly gardener struggling to gather broken flower pots before another snowfall arrived. Without hesitation, Evelyn knelt beside him and quietly helped collect each piece. The old man smiled gratefully. "You should not trouble yourself, Miss Carter," he said. Evelyn returned the smile with gentle warmth. Kindness is never trouble. Neither of them noticed several nobles watching from a nearby stone walkway. Lady Miriam, whose family had advised the throne for generations, frowned deeply. "She wants everyone to admire her," she whispered to the others. "This cannot continue." Later that evening, the royal council gathered for a winter reception attended by military leaders, scholars, and noble families from across the kingdom. Evelyn had not planned to appear, but the house steward informed her that the Alpha King himself had requested every honored guest join the gathering. Unsure whether refusing would create more problems, she accepted and entered the grand hall wearing the simple navy gown prepared for her arrival. Music drifted softly beneath crystal chandeliers while hundreds of candles reflected across polished marble floors. Conversations filled the room until Evelyn stepped inside. One by one, voices faded into uneasy silence. She could almost feel every question hanging in the air around her. Lucian Ashford stood near the tall window speaking with his advisors when he sensed her presence before turning. The moment his silver eyes met hers, the familiar certainty returned with even greater strength. He excused himself without explanation and crossed the hall toward her. Before he reached the center of the room, an unexpected sound shattered the quiet. A towering decorative banner hanging above the entrance slipped free from its wooden support after one of its old ropes finally gave way. The heavy fabric and carved beam began falling directly toward Evelyn. She looked up only after hearing startled gasps around her. For a brief second she stood frozen, unable to judge where the falling structure would land. Lucian moved without hesitation. Reaching her just in time, he stepped between Evelyn and the descending beam, guiding her gently backward as the heavy decoration crashed harmlessly onto the empty marble floor beside them. The hall fell completely silent. No one spoke. No one even breathed. Evelyn stared at him in stunned disbelief. "Are you all right?" Lucian asked softly, his attention fixed entirely on her rather than the astonished crowd surrounding them. She nodded slowly. "Yes, because of you." He released a quiet breath that only then revealed how deeply concerned he had been. Around them, dozens of nobles exchanged bewildered looks. They had expected their king to protect his realm above all else. Instead, before the eyes of the entire court, the Alpha King had instinctively chosen to protect the quiet young woman everyone else still considered nothing more than a stranger from an enemy land. From that moment forward, the rumors no longer asked whether Evelyn Carter mattered to the king. They asked the far more unsettling question that no one inside Blackwood Citadel could answer. Why did she matter so much? The following morning, a quiet uneasiness settled over Blackwood Citadel like the thin layer of frost covering every rooftop. No one openly questioned the Alpha King's decision, yet everyone had witnessed the same impossible moment inside the Great Hall. Evelyn Carter could still remember the calm concern in Lucian Ashford's voice when he had asked whether she was safe. No ruler had ever looked at her that way, not with pity or obligation, but with the strange familiarity of someone protecting a person they had already lost once before. She tried to dismiss the thought, yet it refused to leave her heart. As the castle slowly returned to its daily rhythm, an unexpected visitor arrived at her chamber. The elderly woman introduced herself simply as Mother Eliza, the oldest keeper of Blackwood's royal archives. Her silver hair rested neatly beneath a dark shawl, and her gentle smile carried the quiet confidence of someone who had witnessed many generations come and go. "His Majesty asked that you never feel alone here," she said warmly. "If you wish, I would like to show you a place very few people ever see." Curiosity overcame hesitation, and Evelyn followed her through narrow corridors that descended beneath the oldest section of the castle. They eventually entered a circular library illuminated by hundreds of candles. Ancient books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, while faded maps and carved wooden relics rested inside glass cabinets. The air carried the comforting scent of aged parchment and cedar wood. Mother Eliza carefully opened a weathered volume resting upon a stone table. Its pages contained hand-painted illustrations of wolves beneath the full moon, families separated by war, and children connected by glowing silver threads. "Long before our kingdoms became enemies," the old woman explained softly, "our ancestors believed the moon goddess sometimes joined two souls long before they understood why. When fear divided kingdoms, memory itself occasionally became hidden until the proper season returned." Evelyn listened quietly, unable to explain why every word felt strangely familiar. As she leaned closer to one illustration, her fingertips brushed the page. Instantly another vision flashed through her mind. She saw herself as a little girl sitting beside a clear stream beneath towering pine trees. Across from her sat a lonely boy with bright silver eyes. His wrist was scraped from climbing over fallen branches. She smiled as she tied a simple wooden bracelet around his arm. "Now you will not be afraid," the little girl whispered. The boy laughed, promising, "Then I will find you again." Evelyn suddenly stepped backward, breathing deeply as the vision vanished. Mother Eliza watched her with calm understanding instead of surprise. "You remembered something," she said gently. Evelyn slowly nodded. It felt real. At that very moment, high above the library, Lucian stood inside the royal chapel holding the same worn wooden bracelet in his hands. During the previous night another forgotten memory had surfaced with remarkable clarity. He no longer remembered only a dream. He remembered the warmth of a little girl's hands carefully fastening the bracelet around his wrist after he had wandered away from his traveling party during a summer festival held years before the border war began. He remembered promising that he would never forget her smile. He remembered turning back only moments later after hearing frightened voices in the distance, only to discover she had disappeared into the forest forever. The war that followed had scattered countless families across the kingdoms, burying childhood memories beneath years of grief and duty. Lucian closed his eyes as understanding slowly settled inside him. The dreams had never been prophecies. They had been memories patiently waiting for the right moment to awaken. Deep beneath the castle, Evelyn rested one trembling hand against the ancient book while tears quietly filled her eyes. Somewhere beyond memory, beyond war, beyond betrayal, two forgotten promises had begun finding their way back to the hearts that had carried them all along. By the end of the week, Blackwood Citadel received unexpected visitors from the southern border. Their arrival carried no celebration, only quiet tension that spread through the castle before the gates had fully opened. Evelyn Carter stood near the library window when she noticed unfamiliar banners crossing the courtyard below. A strange uneasiness settled inside her heart before she even recognized the crest embroidered across the riders' cloaks. It was the Carter family emblem. Her breath caught. She had not expected anyone from her former home to seek her out. Moments later, the house steward informed her that a delegation from her homeland had requested an audience with the Alpha King. Evelyn remained in her chamber, uncertain whether she wished to hear anything from the family that had already chosen silver over blood. Inside the great audience hall, Lucian Ashford sat upon the carved oak throne as the delegation approached. At their head walked Owen Carter, dressed in expensive traveling clothes that looked far finer than anything he had owned only weeks before. He bowed respectfully, though his confident smile revealed little humility. "Your Majesty," Owen began smoothly, "I have come regarding my sister. I trust she has adjusted well to her new circumstances." Lucian regarded him in silence. "Continue." Owen folded his hands behind his back. "When we reached our agreement, I believed additional compensation might become appropriate if my sister proved valuable within your kingdom." Several council members exchanged uneasy glances. The request echoed through the chamber with uncomfortable clarity. Owen had not come to ask whether Evelyn was safe. He had not come seeking forgiveness. He had returned hoping to profit from her once again. Before Lucian could answer, Captain Rowan entered carrying several sealed documents recovered from a merchant caravan intercepted near the northern border. He placed them carefully before the throne. "Your Majesty, our investigators completed their inquiry this morning." Lucian broke the royal seal and quietly reviewed each page. The room remained silent except for the soft crackling of nearby fireplaces. As he continued reading, his expression became colder, though his voice remained calm. These records confirm that confidential trade routes belonging to both kingdoms were sold to private merchants during the final years of the border conflict. Owen's confident smile faded slightly. Lucian turned another page. The signatures appear repeatedly beneath every agreement. He slowly raised his eyes. "Your name appears on every one of them." Owen immediately shook his head. "There must be some misunderstanding." "There is none," Lord Aldrin replied, stepping forward with additional ledgers gathered from neighboring provinces. "The dates, witnesses, and accounts all match." The hall grew still. Owen looked around, searching desperately for support that never came. Every explanation he offered unraveled beneath the growing evidence. His pursuit of wealth had extended far beyond betraying his sister. He had quietly traded information that endangered countless innocent families on both sides of the border while enriching only himself. At that moment, the great doors quietly opened. Unaware of the discussion inside, Evelyn entered after being summoned by Mother Eliza earlier that afternoon. She stopped immediately upon seeing her brother standing before the throne. Their eyes met for the first time since the frozen morning when he had watched her wagon disappear beyond the village. Owen attempted a familiar smile. "Evelyn, tell them this has all been exaggerated." She looked at him for a long moment, searching for even a trace of the brother she had once trusted. Instead, she saw only fear born from losing everything he had tried so hard to gain. Lucian slowly rose from the throne and descended the steps until he stood beside Evelyn rather than above her. His voice remained steady enough for every soul inside the hall to hear. "No one will decide her future except her." The simple declaration transformed the silence. For the first time in many years, Evelyn realized she was no longer standing alone. Whatever came next would not be chosen for her. It would finally be chosen by her. The great hall remained silent long after Lucian Ashford's words settled over the gathered court. No one challenged the Alpha King. No one questioned why the final decision belonged to Evelyn Carter. Even the crackling fireplaces seemed to soften beneath the weight of the moment. Owen Carter looked from one face to another, searching desperately for sympathy that no longer existed. At last his eyes returned to his sister. "Evelyn," he pleaded quietly, "we are family. Everything I did was for our future. I only wanted us to survive." She studied him with calm eyes that no longer carried anger. The pain remained, but it had changed into something quieter, something stronger. "You never asked me what future I wanted," she answered gently. "You decided my life had a price, and then you accepted it." Her words echoed through the chamber with far greater power than raised voices ever could. Owen lowered his head, unable to answer. Lucian stepped back, giving Evelyn the space to speak freely. He would not guide her choice. This belonged entirely to her. She slowly walked across the marble floor until only a few feet separated her from the brother she had once admired as a little girl. Memories filled her heart all at once. She remembered chasing butterflies through summer fields while Owen laughed beside her. She remembered him carrying her across flooded creeks after heavy rain. She remembered believing that no matter what happened, her brother would always protect her. Somewhere along the road between childhood and ambition, that promise had quietly disappeared. Evelyn released a slow breath. "I could choose to spend the rest of my life remembering the day you sold me," she said softly. "Or I could choose the life waiting in front of me instead." Owen finally looked up, confusion replacing fear. Evelyn continued, her voice steady enough for every person in the hall to hear. "I do not ask for revenge. I do not ask for punishment beyond what the law already requires. I ask only this. Let him leave this kingdom with the knowledge that he lost his family long before he lost his fortune." The room remained completely still. Mother Eliza quietly closed her eyes with peaceful approval. Lord Aldrin nodded almost imperceptibly. Even the seasoned commanders standing along the walls seemed moved by the unexpected mercy they had just witnessed. Lucian's expression softened with unmistakable respect. He had ruled through strength for many years, yet at that moment he was reminded that true strength often arrived without anger. "So it shall be," he declared. "Owen Carter will depart Blackwood under permanent banishment. He will receive no further audience, no additional reward, and no authority within these lands." The royal guard stepped forward, not with hostility but with quiet dignity, preparing to escort Owen from the castle. Before leaving, he turned toward Evelyn one final time. For the first time since arriving, genuine regret appeared across his face. No words followed. None would have been enough. As the great doors closed behind him, an unexpected feeling of peace settled inside Evelyn's heart. The burden she had carried since that frozen morning finally lifted. She had not reclaimed the past, but she had reclaimed herself. Lucian approached her only after the hall had nearly emptied. He spoke softly enough that only she could hear. "Many people believe forgiveness belongs to those who receive it." Evelyn looked toward the sunlight pouring through the tall windows. "I think it belongs even more to the one who gives it." A quiet smile touched Lucian's face. In that simple answer, he recognized the same gentle spirit that had reached out to a frightened little boy beneath moonlit trees so many years before. And for the first time, he no longer wondered whether destiny had brought Evelyn to Blackwood. He simply felt grateful that it finally had. Spring arrived quietly over Blackwood Citadel, melting the last traces of winter from the castle gardens where fresh wildflowers now covered the hillsides with gentle color. The kingdom had changed in ways few could have imagined only weeks before. The rumors had faded. Suspicion had given way to admiration. The young woman who had entered the gates as a stranger was now greeted with genuine warmth wherever she walked. Children smiled when they saw Evelyn Carter passing through the gardens. Servants no longer whispered after she disappeared around a corner. Even the noble families who had once questioned her place had come to respect the kindness that never changed regardless of how she was treated. On the evening of the first full moon of spring, the royal court gathered in the ancient courtyard where generations of Alpha kings had honored the promises that shaped the future of the kingdom. Hundreds of lanterns illuminated the stone paths while musicians filled the cool night air with soft melodies carried gently by the mountain breeze. Evelyn stood beneath the old cedar tree overlooking the valley, wearing a simple silver gown that reflected the moonlight without unnecessary grandeur. She had never cared for crowns or titles. Peace had always mattered more. Lucian Ashford approached slowly, carrying something small wrapped in dark blue cloth. When he stopped before her, he carefully unfolded the fabric, revealing the worn wooden bracelet that had remained beside him since childhood. Evelyn looked at it in silent wonder. Without thinking, she reached into the pocket of her cloak and removed an identical braided cord she had discovered among the few belongings that had traveled with her from home. Mother Eliza had quietly placed it there after their visit to the archives, believing the proper moment would eventually arrive. The two simple keepsakes matched perfectly despite the passing years. Memories rushed back with astonishing clarity. A summer festival before the kingdoms became enemies. A frightened little boy lost among towering pine trees. A lonely little girl who refused to leave him alone. Two children promising they would never forget each other before soldiers searching the forest pulled them toward different roads. The border war had stolen the years that followed, but it had never erased the promise itself. Tears shimmered in Evelyn's eyes as she smiled through the overwhelming memories. Lucian's voice remained calm, though emotion warmed every word. For 12 years I searched every gathering, every neighboring kingdom, and every unfamiliar face because I could never forget yours. I remembered your kindness long before I remembered your name. Every dream that followed was never asking me to find a stranger. It was asking me to find my way back to you. Evelyn gently took his hand. And all this time, I believed the happiest memories of my childhood had simply disappeared. Lucian carefully fastened the old wooden bracelet around her wrist while she tied the matching cord around his. No royal jewels could have carried greater meaning. Around them, the gathered court watched in respectful silence as two forgotten promises finally became one again. Mother Eliza quietly wiped away a tear. Lord Aldrin lowered his head with a grateful smile. Even the oldest members of the court felt as though they were witnessing history returning to the place where it had always belonged. Lucian looked into Evelyn's eyes with the same quiet certainty that had lived inside his heart since the dreams first began. If you are willing, he said softly, walk beside me, not because destiny commands it, but because your heart freely chooses it. Evelyn smiled with peaceful confidence. I choose it. As the full moon rose above Blackwood Citadel, its silver light bathed the kingdom in quiet hope. The woman once traded as though her life carried a price became the heart of a kingdom that finally understood her true worth. And the Alpha King who had spent years searching through impossible dreams discovered that the greatest promises are never lost forever. They simply wait for the right season to lead two faithful hearts home.